So feminist lit theory and criticism, we are going to be looking at how feminism, how feminist lit theory is used as a lens for exploring the meaning of a text. And so feminist criticism is going to ask us to pay attention to the imprint of patriarchy in a text as we're reading it. It is considered political in nature, feminist criticism, because it asks questions about the construction of culture, text, and meaning, and primarily focusing on the power structure of society. Who has the power structure? How are they keeping it? Feminist criticism looks at the ways that literature reinforces or undermines the political, economic, social, and psychological oppression of women. That is its primary function, right? So we're reading a book. Are women oppressed? Are they not? How is it happening? Who is doing it? How are the women responding to it? So this school of theory, feminist lit theory, looks at how aspects of our culture are inherently patriarchal, male-dominated. And then this critique strives to expose the explicit and implicit misogyny in male writing about women. So we're examining all texts, but also, and I think sometimes more importantly, texts by men that are about women. How are the men treating the women in the text? And is it exposing misogyny, or is it undermining the oppression of women within the text? Feminist criticism helps readers notice the relevant and important issues of gender, how women are portrayed in the world of the novel, the gender of the author, and what relevance it bears on how the work is both written and received. And we think about Mary Shelley and how her life as an unmarried young woman who was having an affair with a married man, who kept getting pregnant by him and whose babies kept dying, how that impacts how she wrote Frankenstein. And also looking at how it was received, because she was a young woman and publishers were a bit incredulous that there's no way a woman, a girl, could have written this, right? And the public thought that the text was vulgar and disgusting. Also looking at the way the text embraces or confronts the prevailing ideologies of how men and women are situated in the real world. So Mary Shelley wrote about a man in the 1700s as well as a woman. So Victor and Elizabeth in the 1700s. How are they situated in the real world? Are they perpetuating the gendered roles of that time, or are they breaking free of them? And then also, feminist lit theory does ask us to pay attention to our own interpretations as readers, because we bring to the text our gendered lens. So, you know, as a cis female heterosexual middle-aged middle-class woman, I have filters that I read the text through, and I need to be aware of those and to be able to push them aside when I'm going to use a literary lens to explore a text. In class, we looked at these two pictures and talked about how they are same and how they are different, noticing something from the 50s versus something from today, and using this as an example of how feminist lit theory itself has changed over time as gender roles have also changed. And so feminist lit theory invites us to consider a wide variety of issues in gender relating to the living situations of men and women. And so in a text, we examine characters. Who are they? How are they being portrayed? How are they being described by the author? How are they being described by each other, right? We look at the language that's being used, not only diction, like word choice, like are the women women or are they girls? Okay. Also, syntax as well. If you're going to write about women and look at it from a standpoint of raising up women, are you focusing on male gendered language and putting men first, like men and women instead of women and men? Looking at relationships and how they play out in the text, right? How are women in relationship with each other? How are men in relationship with each other? How are men and women in relationship with each other? And then also looking at the author, again, is the author male or female, and how does that impact the way the men and the women are explored and treated in the text? And again, the reader, we can't completely ignore the reader, but when we do a look of feminist theory, we have to acknowledge ourselves as a reader and our own gendered response, and then we have to shove that aside, right? Like they say, check your privilege. We're going to check our gender, check our filters, because we don't want to be bringing ourselves into the text as much as we want to be looking at what are the criteria from a feminist standpoint and what are we seeing in the text to try to stay as objective as possible. So then the 4 dimensions to feminism include these things. So how we as readers, if we're going to look at a text from a feminist stance or through a feminist lens, how are we viewing female characters and appraising the author's stance toward those characters? How are we as readers evaluating the significance of gender of the author and its influence on the work? How are the feminist lit theorists, the readers, interpreting the whole text within a feminist framework? And then lastly, as a feminist critic, how are we reading the gendered patterns of the world? And this has to be not only the world in which the book is set, but the world in which the author lived, right? So Mary Shelley set the book in the 1700s. She lived in the 1800s. And we have to take that into consideration when we're doing a feminist read of her book. We can also then pull the book into the 21st century and do an overlay of gendered ideas from 2020 and look at, how relevant is the book today? And if we use our modern sensibilities from a gendered standpoint, how does that alter the meaning that we pull from the text? So a lot of stuff happening when we use a feminist lens. There are 6 foundations of feminist criticism, and I'm not going to read these out loud because it's going to take too much time, and I will send you a copy of the slideshow so you can read them at your leisure. But these are the foundations on which feminist criticism is rooted. So way back, 200-300 years ago, when feminist criticism first started moving, these are the assumptions of society that feminist criticism dropped its roots into. So while some of these might not be true anymore necessarily, it's important to know where feminist lit theory is coming from. And so it looks at women being oppressed by the patriarchy. It looks at how in every domain where patriarchy reigns, woman is other, woman is marginalized. Feminist theory looks also at how the portrayal of women throughout the history of Anglo-European culture is rooted in patriarchal ideology. And in class, we talked about the story of Eve from the Judeo-Christian Bible. We talked about Pandora from Pandora's Box, the Greek myth, and how many cultures around the world use women as the vehicle for the person who brought about death and destruction and negative change within the society. The last 3 look at the difference between sex and gender, how sex is biological, it is at the DNA level, chromosome level, right? And gender is a cultural construct. Feminist activity has as its ultimate goal to change the world by promoting gender equality, and that gender issues play a part in every aspect of human production and experience. Then we jump into the 3+1 waves of feminism in the U.S. So the feminist movement, as far back as the 1700s to the early 1900s, the focus was on inequalities between the sexes, primarily looking at the suffrage movement or the right to vote. In the 1700s into the 1800s, the feminist movement, the suffrage movement, was also part of the abolitionist movement. And then as we got closer to the Civil War era, the abolitionists decided, you know what, we have a better chance of ending slavery than we have of ending slavery and giving women the right to vote. So I think we're just going to focus on ending slavery. And the feminists were left out in the wind fighting their own fight. And And so the Civil War ended in 1865. Slavery had been abolished in 1864 or 1865. And then it wasn't until 1920 that women got the right to vote. Second wave of feminism is the early 1960s to the late 1980s. This was a focus on creating a coherent feminist political activism, like the National Organization of Women. This is the second wave of feminism, connected very closely with the civil rights movement. And this was beyond just the right to vote. This was the ability for women to rent an apartment without having a man sign for it, or to have her own checking account or savings account or bank account without a man having to sign for it. So it really was about civil rights, and it included civil rights for Black Americans as well, right? It was all one big group. Third wave is the 1990s to present, and this era of feminism moves away from focusing on white, heterosexual, middle class women and their civil rights to include marginalized populations' experiences, right? So we're connecting more to other ethnic groups and the lived experiences of all women. And this kind of also includes the Me Too movement, the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls movement, the rise in the understanding of toxic masculinity, and then I know it's cut off on your screen here, but the last one is the increased focus on ending rape culture. So all of that is part of that third wave, that it's not just about, the housewives who want the jobs and the family and the kids and they want it all. It's about all women having equal rights and having equal rights to all opportunities. The fourth wave is newer, and I'm not sure that all literary theorists agree that there is a fourth wave just yet, but there's a focus on resisting the perceived overgeneralized simplifications of the white, cisgender, heterosexual, middle-class women, of the second wave and the third wave. And added to this is an expansion of marginalized populations' experiences. And that includes something that has been referred to as queer theory. So what that means is that there's a connection to more gender fluidity, to the LGBTQIA communities. And I think there's a chance that potentially the term feminist lit theory will be dropped, and there will be a focus on gendered lit theory moving forward. Because while queer theory, which is a look at a text through the lens of from a homosexual critical lens, so are the writers homosexual, are the characters homosexual, how is the homosexual culture and community treated within the context of that text? Well, that started out as its own separate lit theory. I think as time has gone on and there's been a greater move to increase the presence of people at the table of gender equality, I think we're going to see a shift where feminist theory and queer theory are going to fall under the umbrella of gendered lit theory. So that's kind of that fourth wave, going away from male, female to any space on the spectrum between those two ends. Gendered lit theory, which includes the lens of queer theory, this information is going to come from a book called Gender and Pop Culture, a text reader from 2014, and I'm going to run out of time, so I think what I'm going to do at this point is stop this video and then do a part 2.